All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our special briefing on Hurricane Michael. Michael is my dad's name, and so when I texted him yesterday, I said, I'm pretty sure this will be the last Hurricane Michael that we are ever going to see. Um, so, for those of you online, if you have questions, feel free to chat them. I will try to answer them. Just remember that A, you're behind us in real time here, and B, I may not see them right away, but I will try. All right, so I just wanted to start off with the overview. Here we have Hurricane Sergio, and then here's Michael, who everyone is talking about. We also have Tropical Storm Leslie, who was quoted in the most recent discussion from the National Hurricane Center at 11 p.m. But how Leslie may head off towards Europe, or it may just roam around indefinitely in the North Atlantic. Leslie seems to not want to. I'm just going to click into this quickly while we're talking about Leslie, just because I want to show you the track. Leslie just, we'll zoom out a little bit. Leslie just seems to keep meandering.
That's one of the biggest southward movements I've seen in a PC. They rarely go south, and they almost never go southeast like that.
How does this compare to Nadine in 2012?
Yeah, that did a little.
Yeah, Nadine did. Yeah,
but not quite as much of a southward though.
Yeah. But Leslie's forecasted to pick up by an upper level trough and start heading over to the west. If that trough misses it, like it's been missed by, I believe, a couple already, it could just continue. And that was the National Hurricane Center's lighthearted conversation about how it may just linger indefinitely.
Are we anywhere close to a record for being out there? I know it's like a
No.
month or more, right?
Yeah.
Is the record.
Yeah. The
There was
question.
one in the West Pack that went, I think, 50 days or something.
Wow.
It actually went from East Pack to Central Pack to West Pack, and then back to Central. Yeah, all over the place.
And we also have newly formed Tropical Storm Nadine. This was a special advisory a couple hours ago. And I just want to point out the two cyclones that we have in the Indian Ocean. We have Luban and then Tropical Storm 6. According to the Indian Bureau of Meteorology, that this is the first time since satellite era began in 1979 that there have been two tropical cyclones in the Indian Ocean basin. So.
Yeah, they've been close. They had one that was a depression.
Yeah, it was a strong depression.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what a strong depression is, but they've had one other case where there was a cyclone and a quote strong depression. This is the first time there have been two cyclones, though, according to the Indian Bureau of Meteorology.
Why does 6 not have a name? Or is 6 actually?
I have no idea.
There is a name with it. I don't know why it's not plotting it.
Yeah.
Could be too recent or something.
All right, so of course, what everyone wants to come talk about, this is the current 1-minute imagery from Hurricane Michael. And one thing that has developed recently for Michael is this nice pronounced eye. We have convection wrapped around to the north of Michael. One issue Michael's been having its entire life cycle has been trying to get convections and trying to close off the western eye wall, which is something that we will talk about a bit later in this briefing. But Michael's eye is finally starting to pop out. Remember, just 2 days ago, Michael was only a tropical depression. So moving on to the National Hurricane Center main page. Current update from Michael is it's currently at 95 knots, which I believe is still holding steady from the last briefing, or is that, from the last update. So this is a high-end Category 2. If Michael were to get to 100 knots, then we'd be looking at a Category 3 system. So just clicking into Michael, we can see that we have forecasted to be a major hurricane, which is the 100 knots. And there are hurricane warnings along the entire Florida panhandle. So next thing I want to do is I want to just jump into some aircraft recon because we've had multiple aircraft flying into Michael during the day. There's actually one report that before 12Z today, which is 7 a.m. local time, there was the NOAA aircraft and the Air Force aircraft in the eye of Michael at the same time, and they could actually see each other. So they're currently doing at least fixes every 3 hours for Michael. And then we also had, it's probably just easier to go down here. This flight is finished, but there's also been synoptic missions for Michael to try to get a better idea of potentially where the track is going to go. I'm just going to scroll back up. And here we have the Air Force mission, which is now finished. They are currently heading back to, I believe, Biloxi, Mississippi. Their forecast is where they're located. Looking at the center fixes, if we enlarge this, we have you can see Michael heading off to the north, maybe a bit to the west of north. Uh, Between the first and second center fix, it said it dropped about 3 millibars, but the rest of it has remained pretty steady. One thing that is interesting with Michael is this imbalance between the western eye wall and eastern eye wall. So if I can, let me just find this quickly. I believe the last path, yes, the last path started way down here on the southwest and then went up to the northeast. And so if you look at the track along, or the flight level winds and the surface winds along that path, here we have the flight level winds. This is in blue. So this would be the western eye wall, and this would be the eastern eye wall of Michael. And you can see that there is a big difference between the winds on the western side of Michael and the winds on the eastern side of Michael. The eastern side is where we'd expect to see higher winds just because of motion. So Michael's heading off to the north, and then with the anticyclonic the cyclonic circulation, so counterclockwise, we would expect winds strongest on the east side. But this is still a huge difference between the winds. This is at flight level of the aircraft. This is at the surface level. They use a machine that pretty much looks at the how the wave, SFMR, which looks at the waves and can identify how strong the winds are. And we can see this big difference between the winds on the western side of the eye wall and the eastern side of the eye wall.
What sensing technique is that? SMIR.
It's just a radiometer.
It's a radiometer.
Microwave radiometer.
All right.
So bringing up, this is the Mimic product. So it uses microwave imagery, which allows us to see below the clouds, and we can see a bit more of the precipitation associated with Michael. And here we can see this wide open western eye wall. And then as we even get to the end of this movie, that the western eye wall is still open. So we saw that in the recon. We're seeing this in the microwave. This is one thing that is really hindering Michael's ability to keep undergoing rapid intensification.
It seems like it's filling in both in the IR and the vis image and this a little bit.
Yeah, maybe at the end it's filling in a little bit. But it's still, I would definitely still call this in a microwave an open eye, especially way down here on the southeast.
But the SSTs, how are you using that? Or looking at it
Yeah.
more?
The problem, I don't really want to call it problem, but one of the things that Michael's been dealing with is a lot of shear. So I'm going to put up the IR image, and I'm just going to get rid of the track and the forecast for now, because it's very obvious to see where Michael actually is, and then add the shear product from the winds, where green is favorable for genesis or intensification, red or yellow is neutral, and the red is unfavorable. And Michael is in a very, quote, unfavorable environment for intensification. And so we think that potentially the shear is one reason why Michael's eye to the west is still open. If we take that off and also look at sorry, that's not what I wanted. Here we go, TPW up here. There's also potential that it's ingesting some dry air. So one of the things that could be happening is the shear is just being a bit too strong to allow Michael to keep intensifying. Considering it's getting really close to Florida coast, that is good news. The question could be if that shear happens to relax, what's going to happen with Michael's forecast.
Before you move on, can you bring up the OHC?
Oh, yes.
Just wanna
I didn't even
comment.
bring up OHC. Sorry, I didn't even bring up SST and OHC.
So there's this big cold eddy that
I feel the track on.
is the other hindrance right now. It's going to come out of that cold eddy and go over the warmer OHC, and I'm concerned about even beyond that. There's another warmer OHC as it gets towards land. And if you do SST, you
Yeah, if you look at
see,
SST,
that could, if the shear relaxes a little and over that kind of ocean environment, that's a dangerous
Did it
situation.
intensify over that cold pocket or before it got to it?
It kind of has steadied out once it's over it, but
yeah.
But it's not really
So I
a
believe
cold
it
pocket.
yeah.
well, it's a relative depth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's a relative,
it's a shallow pocket of warm water. We'll call it a shallow pocket.
right?
Where did that come from?
I mean, it's moving enough where the upwelling maybe isn't
I-
huge.
Do you
Was there a
know?
previous system that?
Normally, there's a
No.
loop current that is sort of connecting there, and this year it just kind of pieced off. I don't know.
Interesting.
But no, Michael's
Yeah.
well, we were going to talk about the rapid intensification. We'll just bring it up now. Michael's rapid intensification occurred while it was down here, pretty much to the south of Cuba.
Yeah.
So speaking of Michael's rapid intensification, we're just going to go to that now. So this is the, let me just blow it up a bit more. This is the CIMSS SATCON product. And so this black line is the intensity of Michael. And so if we look, this location right around here is 12Z on October 7th, where Michael was at 35 knots of intensity. You jump forward 12 or 24 hours to 12Z on the 8th. That was when Michael first became a hurricane, and that's at 65 knots. So that means in 24 hours, Michael intensified about 30 knots, which is what is widely considered the threshold for rapid intensification in 24 hours. Unfortunately, it didn't intensified, but apparently did not look that good on satellite imagery, as a lot of the satellite predictors, including SATCON and ADT, were lagging behind the actual intensification of Michael. And one reason to that could have been is that Michael rapidly intensified in an area that had a very high amount of shear. So I'm going to bring up the ship's intensity forecast. This is from 12Z on the 7th. So that was Sunday morning when Michael was just a tropical storm at that point. And looking at the shear right here, the ship's analysis said that Michael was going to be under a lot of shear. At the 0 hour forecast, about 20 knots of shear, maybe weakening a little bit, but still what we consider moderate to strong shear. And as a result, that wasn't going to be helping Michael's intensity at all. If you look down here, vertical shear magnitude, it may have helped the intensity a little bit. We saw it this forecast had an intensifying about 15 knots, but Michael actually intensified 30 knots. And just looking at the shear analysis from that time, here we are at 12Z on the 7th. Here's Michael in an area of very strong shear. Jumping ahead to 12Z on the 8th. Michael is still in an area of very strong shear. So what appears that we're having is one of those cases where we have moderate to strong shear and rapid intensification does in fact occur. This isn't very common. I was looking up some cases of this. The last one I saw was Joaquin in 2015, which managed to underwent 30 knots of intensity increase in 30 hours. So not quite the RI threshold. That one is more infamous because that was the hurricane that was part of the Alfaro disaster, where or at least 9 sailors lost their life. But it also just goes to show how difficult it is to forecast hurricane intensity in shear.
Shear on the west is actually weaker for the eyeballs.
Yeah, but there's still shear over the entire system.
The ship's thing, what's the second shear? Adjusted or 8? What is that?
What is
That's
that?
a new parameter that they try to take into account the vertical profile of the shear, not just the 5200. So if it's a deeper layer shear, then they have an adjustment factor that goes into it. Similar to what we do with our CIMSS shear, where we try to take layers instead of levels.
Yeah, but just scrolling down. So the probability of RI, here we had 30 knots in 24 hours. It had a 9.2% probability of RI.
That's from what time?
This is from 12Z on the 7th, so before RI
When it was
began.
35 knots.
Yeah, it was a 35 knot tropical storm, 12Z on the 7th.
Yeah.
24 hours later, it was a 65 knot storm, and this gave it even the ship's RI, the highest probability was only 9.2%. Which 9%, that was only 1.4 times the climatological mean.
What is the last one? 65 knots in 72 hours on the bottom, 80%?
I'm not entirely sure what DTOPS is.
We're at now?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what DTOPS is.
I'm not sure either what that is.
Yeah.
But it does ramp up a little bit. I mean, 55 and
48 was
30.
it was 31%, and then 65 and 72.
So that would verify tomorrow morning.
Would Jim know what that would be?
He
Yeah.
might.
So that'd be looking at 100, so 65, and then this was forecasted at 35, so it'd be 100 knots by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, which is
Likely.
which is probably likely, not out of the question. And then I just wanted to bring this up. So this is the shear tendency for the past 24 hours. So this is 12Z on the 8th. So that means the 24-hour period is this 12Z on the 7th to 12Z on the 8th, which is where we saw rapid intensification occur. We could, according to this analysis, where Michael ended up was experiencing at least a decrease in shear. However, we're still looking at shear around 20 knots, which would still be considered high shear. So it's one of those questions where it rapidly intensified. Not sure we can 100% say why.
Well, again, you know, RI is dependent on the thermodynamic component as well as the dynamic component. They're
Yeah.
not always acting in the same direction. In this case, we had competing forces, right?
Yeah,
And
very.
the thermodynamic potential is very strong
Mhm.
in that region. The OHC is very warm. SSTs
These
are
are
very
very
warm.
warm.
Slow moving system.
And it's slow moving system.
So it was
reduces
able to
that.
overcome that heavy shear, and now it's kind of, the battle is on right now between the two, and so
Yeah.
it's flattened out a
Yeah.
little bit, but
Well, it's flattened out a little bit because now it's still not in an area of favorable shear, and now it also is dealing with the fact that we saw the OH, it's over an area of lower OHC, so that could be why it's stalling out a bit right now.
third thing is the dry air, of course. You know,
Yeah.
that's shear is getting some of that dry air in there, then it's another inhibitor.
Mm-hmm.
Battle's on.
Derek is apparently listening and wants us to repeat questions, so talk louder or I will repeat them. Derek, we got your message.
Derek's in Pensacola right
Yes.
now. He's chasing.
He flew down this morning in front of the storm.
Yes, Derek flew to Pensacola this
You don't
morning. That is why
chase
I
our
am giving
people.
you your briefing. I'm moving on. I just wanted to go. I'm just gonna make that a bit smaller. Nice. I just wanted to go back, looking at some forecast trends. One thing about this forecast, well, the intensity of it has been a bit iffy on its accuracy. Looking at the location for the most part has been consistent. So this is the GFS trend in the forecast locations, or the American model is X's are where Michael has been not initiated, but that's where it said Michael has been at the forecast time. So the lighter forecasts are older. What you can pretty much see is that there has been a consistent trend, basically since this only goes back to 7 p.m. Sunday night, or 0Z on the 8th. But over the last 6 forecast cycles have been very consistent, looking for landfall around the Panama City beach. Maybe going a bit farther to the west as we keep going, but especially through the main part of the storm, it's all been in the same general location.
But that bay to the right of the track is going to get surge beyond Panama City, right?
Are you talking about this
Right
bay
there, yeah.
with like Apalachicola?
That's a bad place for
Yeah.
surge.
And also the track later in the forecast is trending more to the right in North
Yes.
Carolina. And
Mhm.
so I'll show you a map that's actually not very good for North
No,
Carolina.
they don't need any more.
Yeah.
As you can probably imagine why.
Yeah.
Aggressive.
So what was pointed out is that the surge potential into this Big Bend or the Apalachicola area, which I think Shane is going to talk about later.
I'll show you. I'll show
Yeah.
you just a couple.
And what's not really being talked about, Michael, because everything's focusing on landfall, is as it keeps trending to the right or the east here, especially at least in the GFS model. This is the area that just got hit by Florence and really doesn't need any more rain. And the impacts from a hurricane will definitely extend well beyond landfall.
Fortunately, it's trucking pretty fast with this.
Yeah.
Aggressive.
Fortunately, it's moving pretty fast. So if you look at the ECMWF has pretty much also agreed, at least right now, at the landfall along, like right near Panama City Beach.
So what are those three
And here's our-
landfalls? I can't tell which one's which.
So this is the most recent landfall. This is the one before that, and this is the earliest. So first, second, third.
Stop wobbling.
So
Big
yes, it's been,
difference with the global models is they've been slower,
yes.
6 to 9 hours slower in the landfall than the H work.
The comment was that these global models have been slower. But if you look at the official forecast, I can't even distinguish which one's the earliest and which one's the latest for the most part. They have been very well sandwiched together. And then looking at This is the mean absolute error. So the error in the forecast compared to where um, Michael is found to be. And we are looking at, for a 12-hour forecast, underneath 15 kilometers. The official here is this red. And so there's 8 members in here, or there's 8 forecasts in here right now. And you're probably looking at an average error of maybe 40 kilometers. So for the most part, the position of Matthew has been very well forecasted. Michael. I'm going to say, I've said Matthew before. I was going to say Joaquin earlier, and I stopped myself and said Michael. There's too many M's. Don't tell my dad that. But his middle name is Matthew, so you know what? If I say Matthew, it's probably okay.
Cover 'em both.
I got them both covered. Sorry, Dad.
That's at or better than the typical, like they publish this climatology and like map or the graphs every year, how close their forecasts are. I think it's around 50.
50, 100, 150 for
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
3 years.
Mhm.
Pretty
Yeah.
typical.
It's at or better than.
Yeah. So the comment is that this is actually at or better than what their climatological error is.
Right.
Usually climatological is about 54 at 12 hours, 100 for at 24 hours. And it's even at 24 hours, we're only looking at about maybe 75.
And a lot of that is the slow motion
Yeah.
and initial go to.
But we still do have to look at in the error intensity knots, and yes, there still is a lot of error.
Job
And-
security right there. Rapid intensification. We don't know how
Yes.
to do that yet.
Job security, rapid intensification under moderate wind shear. And then also just to further just kind of drive home how well the forecasts have been, this is plotting the NHC cone. So this is I'm plotting right now the 120-hour cone. And just like the last page, the lighter and thinner are older, and then the darker are the more recent forecasts. Here you can see Leslie just kind of meandering all over the place. But here is Michael. And we can see for the most part, the landfall, like Panama City, has always been within the cone. This is for the EC ensemble. And then looking for the GFS ensemble as well. They're both fairly consistent. GFS may be at least a bit more to the west than the EC is in the ensemble cone.
So back to the GFS, what's the red cone on the western part of the US? Was that
Oh, the red
Sergio?
over here is, yeah, the
That's
question
interesting.
was, what's this? This is Sergio.
Rain.
Sergio is forecasted, I didn't talk about Sergio because I was focusing so much on
Yeah.
Michael. Sergio is forecasted to make landfall into Baja as just not just a tropical storm, but as a tropical storm. Shouldn't say just because you can get a lot of water even from just a tropical storm. But so this is the current track of Sergio. We just don't see that in the ECMWF. All right, finally going to some forecasts. I'm just going to look at 2 forecasts here. I'm not really going to worry about the GFS and ECMWF. We are probably 24 hours between now and landfall. So I'm going to look at the high res forecast. We have the H Wharf, and then I'm also going to look at the H Mon. And so these are both at 0Z, at 0-hour forecast from 12Z today. And so here we have the H Wharf, and I'm just going to step through this. I'm actually going to go back. So we start at 968 here. And as we keep stepping through, we can see it decreasing. And as we're going here, it's actually decreasing fairly rapidly. So
Captured that observation pretty well with the asymmetry.
yeah.
In the western
Mhm.
Yeah, but look what happens as
Yeah.
we go forward. It really tries to
This
symmetricize.
is what
Yeah.
your fear was, Chris. Is
Yeah.
that rapid intensification just
Oh
pulling.
boy.
So we're looking at forecasts every 3 hours. And so one of the fear with Matthew is if the shear can decrease or if it can close off that western eye wall. We're going to jump back here and you can kind of see how HWARF is saying that we have this open eye wall to the south and west. I'm going to move that quickly. HWARF closes off the eye wall and Michael.
It's okay.
That's the only mistake I made in this. I'm doing well.
That was Florida.
There's
Start-
Yeah. Rapidly intensifies and then makes landfall into. Anyone familiar with Florida can tell me where that is?
West of.
That west of Panama City?
Yes, then
East
I'd
eye
say right.
wall. East
That's-
eye
Yeah.
wall's right
Is that
over there.
938 on there for Melbourne?
Yes, that is 938. That is
That's not
west of Panama City, which means eastern Iowa, which is where we find the stronger winds, are right into Panama City.
Is that Cat 4 wind on the model there?
110.
110 is,
below.
yeah, so I think that's 100 and,
Yeah, but the max is up in the right-hand corner,
oh yeah, here we go. 100, we need 110, that says it's 108.
so 115, just under 4.
I suppose I never even looked at that. All right, let's go
That's
back.
knots, not miles per hour.
So that was 6Z, or this is a 6-hour forecast from 12Z. That's about 18Z. So this is actually a bit low compared to what it currently is because we're at about 95 knots.
Right.
So this is
But-
at 85 knots.
It initialized a little lower
Yeah.
because they didn't have that information.
Yeah, it just initialized lower, but we're saying if we're going 85 knots here, then go to landfall at 30 knots, so you're looking at, that's a 20 knot increase.
What is it, the time?
This time,
No,
One step before
the
that.
time before your landfall shot.
106. So that is intensifying into land.
Noon landfallish.
Yeah, I think a little afternoon if you average the
Little
global
after.
monitor.
Yeah. Noon one. I mean, if there's one upside, don't really want to call this an upside, but I think I'd rather go through a hurricane in the daylight than the dark.
Yeah.
So if there's one potential any sort of upside, it's the fact that this will hit around noon. There'll be plenty of daylight.
When's high tide tomorrow? I mean,
It's in the afternoon. I checked this morning.
Yep.
Depends on where you are, 1 to 3
Right.
feet.
Yeah. The question was
High tide.
question was when is high tide, and high tide, depending upon where you are, is anywhere from 1 to 3 p.m.
It's
And-
1 to 3 feet around 3 p.m.
Oh, excuse me, 1 to 3 feet around 3 p.m. Thank you. I didn't. Yeah. So this would be just before.
the tide's running in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And so this would be 18Z would be 2 p.m. No, 1 p.m. They're in Central Time here. I'm sorry. So that would be 1 p.m. local time. Yeah.
Low tide's at 10.
And the thought is low tide's at 10, but we're not.
I think it's around
Yeah,
10 in the
around
morning.
10 in the
9,
morning.
10.
What does HMON stand for? Okay.
Just next generation H4.
Hurricane model of.
Question was, what does H1 stand for? And the answer is we don't know. Anyway, just gonna step through this.
I don't know if that's
So this is 0Z. This is initializing a bit higher than H. Yeah, they're close enough. They're within there's one within an error.
Okay.
So here's H4 fin initialized at 90 knots. Just keep stepping through this. It seems to not agree with H4 in that closing off this western eye wall. You can still see the western eye wall being much noticeably weaker than the eastern eye wall.
Still 104 knots. And
Yes, it's still 104 knots.
Ooh, it's off.
Right
Yeah,
at the
but
end.
then
That's
One
close over those warmer waters.
14, and then 112, and this is so this is a location at 30-hour forecast.
A lot of this is dependent on the last 12 hours.
Yeah, and then your location at 30 hours. So this landfall is a bit farther to the west, I believe. It's very close, but probably a bit farther to the west. And yes, definitely, we're looking at 112 knots here.
Where's Panama City on there?
And that's up from 90 knots. There's 30 knots. Where?
Panama
Can-
City, just point out where Panama City is.
I'm
There
not
is
entirely
still
sure. I think it's
closer,
around
right in
here.
there, yeah.
Yeah,
it's the
I
wrong
believe
place
Panama-
to be.
Yes. If you're a tourist in Panama City, I would not stay there.
All that bay there is gonna be
Yeah.
bad, because it's
Mhm.
gonna fetch water right up into that
Yep.
bay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you got all these bays along here, and storm surge is going to be heading this way. This is probably going to be the strongest tropical storm that's hit this area of Florida since Dennis in 2005.
There's a lot of high-end buildings along those islands, as far as I remember. And Shane, you mentioned that
Huh.
last one too.
H1 is hurricanes
Lots of
in
expensive
multi-scale
properties.
ocean
Oh,
coupled
yeah, on that
non-hydrostatic
side,
model.
Yeah.
What is it?
H1 is hurricanes in a multi-scale ocean coupled non-hydrostatic model.
Oh, I
Beautiful.
would have guessed that.
Scott, how did you not get that?
I like yours better.
I will note.
Remember it better.
All right, and Derek made a good comment of let's look at the radar reflectivity for to see. Also, first off, thank you. I'm sorry I can't pronounce your name. Dizaban. I'm sorry if I ruined that, but thank you for telling us what H1 stood for. All right, so this is composite radar reflectivity. And so here we can see I'm just stepping through this. I'm still gonna, it's starting to close off, but it's back open here. So I'm just gonna call that open. We're still up into the south, and now finally it's starting to close off, and then
And what time is that?
Portland,
Tomorrow morning?
So it's closed off at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, 12 tomorrow morning.
So something to check.
Yeah, is has it actually closed off? And H Wharf. H Wharf, I believe it looks like it starts closing off around 10 o'clock tonight. But it's not that it's there, but it's like the reflectivity isn't quite as strong, would be my thought. Like we have a southern eye wall, but it's not there's not a very wide southern eye wall compared to HMON, where this is a very substantial southern eye wall.
Chris, is it an all-nighter for you? Stay awake
2 in a row. Yeah.
24 hours.
All right, so with that, wait, no, one more
Was there
thing,
another
then I
method
will turn
line?
it over to Shane. I just want to see if we have any new microwave imagery coming in quickly. Nope, those colors didn't change. To just check this quickly. Unless it doesn't want to respond, in which case we'll just throw this over to Shane. Nope, nothing there. All right, we're gonna throw this over to Shane.
So I just started running storm surge this morning, so it's not quite finished yet, and I think we've touched upon one of the things I did want to look up, because I think Sarah and we were talking about this morning. So I work with State of Florida Emergency Management, and I was there in April, and so Dan and I were talking over email, and so Tallahassee is still sort of in that area where they could get some winds, and they had Hermine in 2016, and Tallahassee is sort of like Madison. We were talking lots and lots of trees, and they had peak gusts around 80 miles per hour. They had 700 homes damaged with that small of a hurricane. $45 million in damage. And how many trees did they say?
What was her mean at landfall? I don't
Minimum Cat 1.
Minimum Cat 1. They also had they counted 800 trees over 90, and then 90 roads, blocking 90 roads. 90% of the traffic signals inoperable. So this area is very, in terms of the impacts, they have quite a lot of trees. The one thing that you'll note, and so this, we were talking about this when we were looking at Florence, and how the Gulf has a very different, the bathymetry along the ocean here is different, and also the topography is far different. And so this is the view that that NOAA has put together for inundation as of the 11 a.m. Advisory 12. What you notice about this part of, and it's not picturing up.
Shane, where's the legend on that?
That's
The
down
legend
here,
for the
sorry.
stars down below.
Red is bad.
Red is bad. There we go.
More than 9 feet over in this
Okay,
area.
yeah, that's bad.
So the thing that I would say though is the research has suggested that, especially when you have intensifying hurricanes, we find the storm surges to be reflective of a time in the past, so maybe 12 hours or 18 hours before. If we're going to see sort of a rapid intensification, we may be more looking at a Category 2 or Category 3 storm surge, and maybe not that 4 storm surge. Another thing that I think you're noticing is that even as you come all the way up into this area, this is Wakala. This out here is mostly a big forest, swamps with some mangroves. There's very little. I took a trip out into this area when I was there in April. It's very beautiful. There's actually not a lot of population. It's very agricultural out here in Franklin County. So in terms of the exposure, right along the coastline and where we intersect through these storm surge areas in here, we're in much better shape than what you would imagine.
Where's Apalachicola on there?
Let me see if I can go back to I think it's right. Not too far here. Apalachicola
What was that in
Forest.
the point more, isn't it?
I think it's right out in here. 'Cause there's the forest here. Go and zoom in one more. So it's not to say that this area is not going to have an issue with storm surge. I mean, we see this in that's too far. They don't really have the best mapping.
But it's less populated in that. big
Far
area.
less populated. So that's one one great thing. One of the things that to keep in mind though, and you're seeing these sort of lower numbers in here, these barrier islands do a lot to keep the storm surge from coming through, and so they actually have a little bit of protection. Now, what may not be captured necessarily is how high these are going and any sort of erosion that might happen to these barrier islands that will allow water to then penetrate into these bays and things here. So
Are there expensive properties on those barrier islands?
yeah, there's no question.
So,
I mean, this is all very
adds to
expensive.
the bill that you're gonna.
So
Oh,
that signal there takes into account that those barrier islands exist and will block
Correct.
the water, but they don't if, obviously, if it's
But
breached.
this modeling, unless they're adding something to it that I'm not aware of, does not take into account the erosion that might be happening as a result of the storm surge and the breaking waves along that coastline there.
That could change dramatically if. you
It
got a
could
breach.
change, and it does. I mean, when Ivan came ashore in 2003, they had a lot of that happening along here. So I would expect.
It's
well,
interesting, Shane, just to
Yeah.
follow up on that. That area has barrier islands too.
through here, but they're
We're to the left. Yeah, there. Where the major flooding is occurring,
right here.
isn't there? There's a whole barrier island.
It could be the elevation of these islands.
It's just like a
Yeah.
foot or
That's that
two.
much cooler
Could be just a
Okay,
bit.
right there.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the tip there, yeah.
Distance from the coast matter at all?
It can. And all the bathymetry out here makes a big difference.
So
I mean,
development-
we have very shallow bathymetry through here, especially as you come out into this area. It's very shallow water out
Is
there.
there any development on that island?
There's not a lot. I mean, you have few communities. Here's a small community.
I mean, on the barrier island there, is that just like a sand dune, or is there actually?
I have the building data on my desktop.
Okay.
I can grab you. Yeah,
I'm
and you can
working
get
on it. Well, there's
Maps.
streets. There's a
Well,
lighthouse.
if there's streets.
I hope
there's a lighthouse.
They're animals.
Could be a park though, if it's just one road or something.
No, that looks like houses. That's a lot of houses.
Yeah,
A lot
you'd
of
think
houses.
they.
That's high
What-
end.
One of the
Yeah.
interesting storm
That's a lot of
surge stories though was
Yeah.
Dennis, in that Dennis I think came landfall out in here, right? Came
Yeah.
from this direction, and Florida was not prepared for storm surges
Right.
over in this area, and they actually had a tremendous amount of storm surge,
That's right.
and a lot of folks were not prepared. But I think we're
Was it
just
like 8 feet of storm surge.
yeah, there was like some cases of
Wow.
8 feet out in here, and folks in Florida still talk about that quite extensively.
Huh.
So this is what I was talking about in terms of, so this is 1 to 3 day QPF, and one thing I'm noticing is I think that the global models must be going faster, and the precipitation totals have been trending further lower. So if you look at the GFS, we're looking at more 4 and 5 inches instead of this 5 to 7 inches in the central part of North Carolina. However, I've also noticed the global models are shifting it further to the east, taking that right across where we've already had a tremendous amount of rainfall. And so this is what it goes without saying. Soil moisture goes into any of these forecasts that we do for stream flow. And it goes without saying that, if you look at the anomaly, it's 140%, 150% above normal in some cases. Whoops. And oh yeah, we have. This is on. I don't know if you saw the map I put together, but there's a huge area of 20 plus inches above normal across the U.S. It's about 125,000 square miles, about the size of New Mexico, in the United States, above 20 inches or more. And we're going to add to that. A lot of these areas are going to be.
Take a drive by Stricker and Kid and Pine, Middleton. Well, not to the banks yet. It's on Park Street and Gammon Road.
Oh, really,
Yeah.
Scott?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So I did some quick wind numbers, and the one thing that causes me a little pause is FDEM, Florida Emergency Management, because of what they saw with the tree blowdown during Hermine. It's possible that we're underestimating the building damage, especially residential buildings, because they saw something that was not picked up by the modeling that we do in 2016. But I think we're looking at, with the storm surge, the wind, around $30 billion, and then the riverine flooding that would be on top of that would take that up a little bit higher.
So half
Depending on exactly where we have the landfall in terms of Panama City, and then if we do get up to that high Cat 3 or low Cat 4, because of those sky rises, because of them being right on the water, they're going to take on a lot more damage. And so as you get into Cat 4 winds, they're going to take on quite a bit more
what
damage.
was Irma?
Irma when? At landfall?
Yeah, just know in terms of dollars at the end.
Irma was over 100 billion, I
So
believe.
this would be like a third.
Yeah, Maria came in at about 70.
Okay.
Irma was over 100
Harvey.
billion, and then Harvey was around 70 when you looked at the riverine flooding and things.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're talking another, Florence will be in the billions, of course, and we'll have another. So we had $4 billion disasters last year. We'll at least have 3 from hurricane, or 2 for sure from hurricanes this year, and 4 last year. So I'm going to have the storm surge model takes 4 or 5 hours, and you don't want to run those too far in ahead of time because the forecast track makes a huge change. So I'll have that finished this afternoon, and then I'll forward that out to the weather enthusiasts along with some damage numbers and building counts. And that's all I have.
National
Thank you.
Hurricane Center is streaming live right now.
So we were
The
competing
director, you're
competing with the
NHC.
Hurricane Center.
No,
they're competing with you. We grew up watching Hurricanes.
Are you anticipating one tomorrow, guys? Right about landfall?
I don't know.